Y'all ready? All right, would you all please rise and join me for the pledge? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is the Monday, November 13th, 2017, regular meeting of Town Council. All members of council are present this evening. Selectman Mr. Vaver is not going to be present this evening. Moving on to the consent calendar. Are there any comments to the consent calendar? All right, seeing none, I'm going to pass the consent calendar. We have communications A through E. I've asked that those communications, as stated in our agenda, be incorporated into our minutes. Moving on to public participation. Are there any members of the public who wish to participate at this time? All right, seeing none, I'll close public participation. We have one appointment this evening, Clark Gingras to Inland Wetland Commission. Ms. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask the council's approval of the appointment to the Inland Wetlands Commission of Clark Gingras, 38 Church Street, for a term ending February 24, 2020.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Martin, second by Ms. Lapellis. Discussion, Ms. Martin?
Yes, Mr. Gingras has lived in Monroe for the past 5 years. He's married to Jennifer Gingras, who's the senior pastor at the Monroe Congregational Church. He's been actively involved in church events for over 12 years and has co-chaired the Strawberry Festival for the Monroe Congregational Church for the last 8 years. He's currently employed with Hertz Corporation, graduated from the University of Connecticut in 1992 with a Bachelor of Arts in History, certification for teaching 7th through 12th in the state of Connecticut art program. He's a veteran with the Connecticut Army National Guard, 87 to 93, and then been involved in disaster relief training with the Army National Guard. Previously volunteer work experience include Simply Smiles International work trips to Oaxaca, Mexico, where he assisted in building sustainable clean homes for residents in the city dump area, provided food distribution for the Zapotec Indians in the mountains of Oaxaca. Oh, this is tough. And worked on the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation, rebuilding homes for the impoverished Native Americans. He's always had an interest in environmental issues, looks forward to supporting the town by volunteering on the Inland Wetlands Commission.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Any further discussion regarding this appointment? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? And against, that motion carries 9-0. Thank you, Ms. Martin.
Thank you.
Moving on to our action items. A is the Town Council Committee on Finance, Education, Health, and Public Safety. Mr. Pellis?
Number one, the Board of Health has not met since the last meeting, and EMS has done the RFQ for the ambulance replacement that was issued. That's it for me.
Thank you, Ms. Lapellis. Moving on to action item B is the Town Council Committee on Planning and Zoning, Public Works, and Parks and Recreation. Mr. Reed?
We haven't met, Mr. Chairman, since our last meeting. However, we do plan to meet very soon on the current status of the Wolf Park Fields and where that is in planning and zoning right now, and what's the contract doing versus the status of the project. In addition to that, we're going to be taking back the Cell on Wheels from AT&T, get a little bit of a deeper dive into that, and then coordinate with planning and zoning through the subcommittee. So expect that next.
Thank you very much. Yep. Moving on to C is the Town Council Committee on Legislative and Administrative Matters. Mr. O'Rourke?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We spoke about the temporary healthcare structures that's now on the books statewide, and what steps we want to take with regards to either embracing that concept or opting out. There'll be a public hearing on December 7th, which I would urge everyone to take note of to get a better understanding of what this temporary health care structure law is all about. We also visited Jakubski Holmes' contract for consulting services for Monroe Volunteer Fire Department #1. Further negotiations are still ongoing. Waiting for further information from town attorney. Monroe Fire Services study contract. 3 bids have been received, all under budget. Let's see, I think we're going to go to vote on that. We're going to approve that, to move that forward in town council tonight. Wolf Park Fields and construction agreement. Let's see here, we're going to table that item until we get further information from Mr. Reed's subcommittee. AT&T cell tower, same thing, waiting for some more information before we move forward on that. That requires a lot of moving parts before we can take action on L&A. Bonding issues that have been ongoing and waiting for the state budget. Under old business, waiting for opinion from the finance department, and plan on inviting them to our next L&A meeting to kind of revisit, refresh all that's involved in those bonding resolutions. So we should be moving forward on those either at that meeting or soon thereafter. And EMS building committee resolution, I guess we're still waiting for something from the town attorney before we can move forward on that. The rest were old items that a lot of different things have to come in before we are able to move forward on.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke, for that report. Moving on to item D is Strategic Planning Committee. Mr. Kellogg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That committee has not met since our last council meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Kellogg. Moving on to item E, the EMS Facility Work Group. I imagine ditto to that, Mr. Kellogg?
Correct. That committee has canceled all meetings pending the formation of an EMS building committee.
Trying to make you speak as much as possible in your last council meeting.
Well, thank you so much for that.
First selectmen's
for that
update.
gift.
Mr. Vavrick is not present. I did not receive a report this evening. Moving on to unfinished business. Chalk Hill, as I've said over and over, I'm going to keep that on our agenda until that building is being formally utilized moving forward. As it stands right now, the plan as approved by SPC and Town Council has been fully implemented. And as I said, I'll keep it on there. Item, any comments to Chalk Hill is on there? No? Okay. B, fire study status report should have come off, to be honest with you. That's been replaced by the fire services study contract, which is item B under new business. But since it's on there, it's open for comment. Anybody wishes to comment? All right. So we will move on to our new business items. A is the EMPG performance grant application for the fiscal year 2017. Ms. LaPellis?
Yep. I make a motion to approve the fiscal year 2017 Emergency Management Performance Grant, enter into with and deliver to the State of Connecticut Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection, Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, any and all documents which it deems to be necessary or appropriate pertaining to the fiscal year 2017 Emergency Management Performance Grant.
Thank you, Ms. LaPellis. Motion by Ms. LaPellis by way of resolution. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Reed. Discussion, for the record, Mr. York, who is responsible for facilitating the application for this grant on an annual basis, did ask and make himself available for the meeting this evening. I told him it was not necessary for him to come in light of us seeing this very standard grant on an annual basis. So with that, again, we have the memo from Mr. Vavrick, we have the memo from Mr. York, and we have a copy of the 2017 application, which is self-explanatory. Does anybody wish to comment on this grant? Can't thank Mr. York enough for his hard work in ensuring that the town does receive the benefit of this grant and the funding for this grant on an annual basis. So with that, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? And against, that motion carries 9-0. Item B is our Monroe Fire Services Study Contract. Mr. Pellis?
I make a motion to approve the agreement between the Town of Monroe and Emergency Services Consulting International of Wilsonville, Oregon.
Motion by Ms. LaPellis, is there a second? Second by Mr. Rooney. For discussion purposes, the chairman of our Fire Services Committee, Mr. O'Hara, is present. Mr. O'Hara, the floor is yours, if you want to just highlight this process and the agreement for us.
So to highlight this, Patrick O'Hara, 282 Shelton Road.
Slow down. Try there again. Patrick?
O'Hara, 282 Shelton Road.
Got it. Thank you.
So out of your strategic planning committee, you folks put together an RFP and established through the First Selectman's Office a committee of 8. The committee is myself as a Board of Finance representative, Mr. Kellogg is a Town Council representative, and the president and the fire chief of each of the 3 fire companies, 4 of those are on the tonight. So that's a committee of 8. You folks handed off to us a substantially complete RFP. We made a couple of tweaks to it. The town attorney then went through that RFP. The RFP was then released. There were 12 companies that took packets, and 3 of those companies submitted a bid. The committee then met to decide the successful bidder. The successful bidder was chosen after a lengthy discussion, which was a consideration of the 3 bids we received. The lowest bid was $17,000 plus or minus dollars. It was discussed that that company didn't really seem to meet the requirements of the RFP. Additionally, that company, it was stated, the Monroe Volunteer Fire Department had a less than satisfactory experience with them. So that brought us back to the 2 other bidders. Backtrack a little bit. In the RFP that you granted to us, we had the ability to change the RFP at any point in time. It was noted when we opened the meeting to start discussing the bidders that none of the 3 bids met all of the requirements of the RFP. However, the things that they didn't meet as a requirement were not considered substantial. So that is the groundwork. I asked the committee if they were willing to go forward because you left in the RFP the ability to change the RFP. The committee said yes. So now we're deliberating. We have 3. We knock it down to 2. The successful bidder was not the lowest bidder, but in your RFP, again, you noted that this was not a low bid contract. And the successful bidder, number 1, we had Fire Marshal Bill Davin make a phone call to all, to a reference on each of the 3 bidders. So the successful bidder had the best reference phone call back to Fire Marshal Davin. Their response to the RFP seemed most in line with everything that the town of Monroe was looking for a successful fire service study, which gets me to in front of you folks tonight. So if you have any questions, feel free.
We'll open the floor up. Mr. Hunsberger?
I sat in on that meeting. I don't have a problem with the final. I have a question about the contract, though. It mentions addendum B, but fails to mention addendum A, which is the larger part of the contract. And I'm just wondering why it was not included in the main contract. The addendum refers to the main contract, but the main contract does not refer to the addendum. And that includes modifications, insurance issues, and most of the language which you would find in the main contract. And I'm not trying to hold up the services contract or the bidder, but it would seem to me that if we modified it to include addendum A, it would tighten up the agreement.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hunsberger. Anybody else? My quick response to that would be, I don't think it's a necessary addition to the contract. I don't think at all. does anything to the integrity or the validity of the contract, and in fact, most of the time, the body of the agreement fails to reference the addendum, which is why addendums are entitled addendums, and the addendum does correctly reference that it's an addendum to the body of the agreement. So I, as a council member, I have no problem with the agreement as it's written. Any other questions? One thing I would point out is L&A, most of the time in L&A this evening was spent with some very detailed questions of Mr. O'Hara. So I want to thank Mr. O'Hara for coming to L&A. I also want to thank the members of the departments for taking the time and coming as well this evening. I know a lot of work went into this. I also want to thank Mr. Kellogg and SPC, because this was one of the very first issues that SPC did tackle, and they did so kind of as an ancillary finding that came out of another meeting that SPC had undergone, and so we kind of stumbled upon the fact that this fire services study had been something that all three volunteer departments were very interested in. They had been very interested in the study for a number of years, and unbeknownst to certainly SPC, but I think all of council, we had heard the exact opposite and something very different over the years. So I just want to thank all three departments for being persistent with this and not giving up on it, and making sure that when you finally got the proper ear to hear the message and to see it through, it's just another example of how the process is supposed to work. I want to apologize to all three departments for the impediments and delays that you experienced previously, but I'm happy to say that once Mr. Kellogg did and SPC did hear about it, they took it on right away, and it's come together as quickly as I think you can have something come together with all the red tape we have to deal with. So just thank you for your persistence and your willingness to work together, and willingness that has always been there, I think, in town, and I think the presumption was always otherwise. So thank you very much for clarifying that for all of us, and I just wanted to make sure that we bring this full circle as much as we possibly can, because I'm not sure everybody was aware of how much collaboration and effort has gone into this, and how excited I know that all three departments are to finally have everything that they've been doing and presuming over the years. So I just want to thank everybody for that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just two other points for the record.
Sure.
Number one, as I pointed out, 6 out of the 8 members are firemen. And when we did go and review the RFPs, I think Councilman Kellogg and myself purposely let the source matter experts, the firemen, lead the discussion on reviewing the RFPs. The other thing, and I just want this said out loud, is that one of the main goals of this study is to maintain all volunteer fire services. So I just wanted that on the record. Thank you, sir.
Anything further, Mr. Kellogg?
Well, what Mr. O'Hara said was the first thing on my, first thing that was going to come out of my mouth, so I want to thank him for saying that on the record. That's something that we want to support our volunteer fire services, and this study is to continue to support that effort and to help them not with strategic planning and operations, but also ability to recruit and retain a strong volunteer fire services for our town. So I thank them for their service and for being eager to engage us and to do this. And as far as the specific RFP process, the other thing I just wanted to add was that the other thing that I think we all discussed and were impressed by in the successful bidder is that it was the company that was the most data-driven. And I think we all agreed that we wanted to make decisions that were based on facts and data. And we really appreciated the detail they had included in their bid package that indicated the type of product we could expect that would be data-driven. So thank you.
Any further comment? Mr. O'Hara, thank you very much. Seeing no further discussion or comment, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? And against, that motion carries 9-0. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you, council members.
Moving on to item C, Wolf Park Multi-Purpose Fields Construction Documents Agreement. In your packet, you do have a letter of opinion from Attorney Fracassini with a proposed agreement, Exhibit A and Schedule B. This is regarding the two fields, multipurpose fields, to be located behind the current football field in the tennis courts at Wolf Park. As Mr. Reed pointed out, I'm going to refer this back to Mr. Reed's subcommittee, just to make sure that we are in full agreement with his committee who had interfaced on this project. And I want to thank him for doing so. For a number of years, has been giving us periodic updates on this product and the status of the project and the status of this project along the way. And because this project started in 2013 and now it's 2017, while all appears to be in order legally upon our review in LNA, I wanted to make sure that from a policy standpoint, Mr. Reed is the subcommittee is fully interfaced with all the necessary parties, both historically and currently, to make sure that this exactly meets with his subcommittee's understanding of the project, as you know, they don't typically get the final letters of opinion and final products all the time, although he's done all the legwork. So just for checks and balances, I'm going to send it back to the subcommittee. They agreed to take it on, and hopefully this will be in a position to vote on at our next meeting. It's on our agenda again, so are there any comments or questions? Floor is open at this time. All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the item D, which is the temporary healthcare structures. As Mr. O'Rourke pointed out, this was in our packet. I was on LNA, I'm sorry. It was on LNA as agenda this evening, and the purpose for it, me putting it on our agenda was just to spurn, make it familiar to everybody, and give everybody ample opportunity to do whatever research is necessary on this particular subject. Our neighbors in Newtown and Easton have already acted on this this particular subject, and planning and zoning, it's a condition precedent to either deciding to opt in or adopt. Actually, I'm sorry, it's presumed to be adopted as a statute, a public act. A town can opt out by first having the Planning and Zoning Commission call for a public hearing, which Mr. O'Rourke announced is going to take place on Thursday, December 7, 2017, here at Council Chambers at 7 p.m. The notice says the purpose of the public hearing is to solicit public comment regarding temporary health care structures as defined and set forth in the State of Connecticut Public Act 17-155, including consideration of the municipal opt-out as set forth and consistent with the provisions of Connecticut General Statutes 8-2 sub A. So the purpose of that hearing is a condition precedent to Planning and Zoning's vote to opt out. If Planning and Zoning votes to opt out, then it's up to town council as the legislative authority to then also vote to opt out, whereupon we will not be bound by this new act. Should we vote to opt out, we can always vote to opt in later on. There's a procedure for that. So it's on our agenda just to make it familiar to the members of council, both old and new, and so that you can take care of noticing and making arrangements to attend that hearing if you want to, the public hearing if you want to, and just be prepared for comment and vote on this sometime in mid-December. Mr. O'Rourke.
And as the chairman pointed out, opting out does not necessarily mean that this idea in some form, as we decide to move forward on it or not, is not a valid one. It just allows us to take a look at it and try to tailor it to the specific needs of the community. The idea and global premise is something to be looked at.
Any further comment or discussion? No? All right, seeing none, Ms. Martin?
In general, two things, if I could,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman. The appointment of Mr. Gengras, I'm not sure if I mentioned that it's to replace Mike Muddett
Okay.
on the Inland Wetlands Commission. I'd like the record to reflect that, so when we're trying to remember who we replaced way back when, so it was Mike Muddett. And one more,
Sure.
if I may. This will be the last meeting for my two compadres here, and I wanted to recognize them and wish them well as they move on to much bigger and better things than the Monroe Town Council, and to thank them for their service.
Thank you.
I echo that. Thank you.
Me as well. Anybody else? Good luck. All right, seeing no further business to discuss, we have second public participation. Going once, going twice. All right, I'll close second public participation. Motion to adjourn.
Allow me,
Mr. Hunsberger, motion, second. Ms. Lapellis, all those in favor? 9-0. Good night, everybody.